In 2016, demonstrators from around the world joined the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe against the proposed Dakota Access Pipeline. It would cross 4 states, bringing oil 1,200 miles from North Dakota to Illinois. Everyone's attention was on the pipeline, but in 2017, despite the protests, the project was completed. But now, 8 years later, something amazing is happening in the same place. The Standing Rock Sioux are taking control of their own energy future, and they're opting for renewable energy. This is the story of Joe McNeil and Sage. I'm Alex Honnold, professional rock climber and founder of the Honnold Foundation, bringing you stories of inspiring people who are helping to solve today's most pressing conservation issues. In partnership with the Rolex Perpetual Planet Initiative, this is Planet Visionaries.
My name is Joseph McNeil. I'm the CEO for Sage Development Authority of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. I manage Sage Development Authority, which is renewable energy, public power authority, developing energy assets for our communities. What do we do with that energy? It was to move forward with plans that we knew we had great wind, to utilize that and own as much of that project as we can so that we can reinvest those profits back into our communities, so that we can stand on our own 2 feet, if you will. As we move forward in the future, we're looking to set ourselves as a model for other nations and other communities to move forward with. My father was one of the first 4 students at the Greensboro sit-in in a segregated South to reignite the civil rights movement at that time. So his lesson to me was to move to change systems. Don't accept things as a status quo. What can we do to maintain our respect as human beings and humanity for ourselves?
Joe, welcome to Planet Visionaries. Good to see you again.
Happy to be here, Alex. Thanks for inviting us.
We've been on a few events together, and I got to meet you at the Standing Rock Nation, tour the site and everything. And obviously the Honnold Foundation has been supporting the work that your organization, Sage, has been doing at Standing Rock. Can you maybe give us some context, like where is the Standing Rock Nation, what is Sage, and talk about the whole context? Sure.
Standing Rock Nation is located right at the border between North Dakota and South Dakota, centrally located. We're about the size of Connecticut. About 2.3 million acres totally encompass the reservation, although we don't own 2/3 of that land. The Sage Development Authority was created as a public power authority by the Standing Rock Tribe in order to catalyze what was happening with the No DAPL event back in 2016, where we fought to protect our water against big oil. It was the one time where I seen, and I hope it happens again, tribal nations from around this country and Canada and Mexico, but indigenous people from around the world came to Standing Rock to stand for the simple principle of having clean water, to protect the water, to protect the land against oil extraction and oil pollution. Our children started that effort, which was totally fantastic. I was going back and forth to Bismarck. I seen teenagers and young folks sitting on the fence line, standing in front of these big cranes that were moving into this area to start digging under the water. And my immediate thought was, how do I support this? How do we get involved? How do we make sure that we stand with these young people to stand up for our own rights, to have clean water, to be able to live and have a voice in what our future looks like?
I mean, it brought tribes together from all over North America, and it brought community together in some ways, but ultimately the pipeline wound up being built. What did that catalyze in your community? How did Sage come out of that?
One thing I thought was really amazing is that folks in our community, a lot of people don't ever leave the reservation growing up or see the world, or can get out or afford to get out. But the world came to us. And our kids got to see people of all complexions and colors. It's something that I cherish in my memories.
And so how did Sage stem from that?
So we've been working at Standing Rock, I want to say for 20 years, roughly. We knew we had good wind. We knew we wanted to be involved in renewable energy.
Why the emphasis on renewables?
Renewables, for us, represents that relationship, that symbiotic relationship, between the earth and our ability to control our own destiny, to live in a sovereign way, because we are Hunkpapa Lakota. We're also Yanktonai, and we're also Sihasapa. And those are three bands of the Lakota. And there's Dakota and Nakota, which were called by the government as Sioux nations, but we call ourselves Lakota, which means the people.
Which we should just add is where the Dakotas come from.
That's where the Dakotas from. North Dakota and South Dakota. Yeah.
Because it's your land.
It's our land entirely. So that we can set a model moving forward with how renewables can be a part of saving communities money so that you can have more savings and give that back to the people, like our work with you guys.
Why don't we dive into the work that the Honnold Foundation has supported at Standing Rock, just because I think in some ways that's a good example of how renewables can help a community like that.
Yeah.
So can you explain the project that we've been supporting?
Yeah. So far, working with Honnold, we've been able to do 10 solar installations, and we have 8 communities. So our goal is, and we hit 7 of 8 communities, district buildings, to put solar there so that they can have savings and reprogram that back to community services. We've done 2 Head Start buildings or 3 Head Start buildings.
So that was the one that I visited, right? That was the Head Start building.
That was the Head Start building in Sioux Village. Yeah. And so those programs can too realize savings and reprogram that back, so that there's some surplus cash to provide for the kids.
When you say reprogram that, I mean, that's basically just putting a solar system onto a building to save their utility bill, and that money stays in the community. That money goes back into, in the case of the Head Start programs, educating kids or paying the teachers or whatever else.
Precisely.
So, I mean, I think that one of the things that I personally was most struck by visiting Standing Rock and seeing the projects, people are spending a tremendous amount of money sort of like heating and powering their lives. Visiting North and South Dakota, like super, super cold. And I was kind of like, wow, these homes aren't insulated even a little. There are a lot of things sort of built into the system that are preventing the community from building wealth.
From day one of particularly, let's take a look at Standing Rock, our people in the Dakotas and federally recognized Indian tribes, and the history of this country, moving westward into the space, invading westward, taking land, and then taking people and putting them onto reservations. So no longer did we have all of the plains to hunt or even the surrounding area to hunt, to provide for our people and live the way of life that we had lived. We were forced to eat commodities. We were forced to eat foreign food. We were forced to farm lands that we had never farmed before. We had cultivated...
and typically lands that are less useful for cultivation.
Yeah.
But go on.
When I talk about the size of Connecticut, and we only own a third of it, and that's what we own, we have to buy our land back even within our own borders because of the Dawes Act, the Homestead Act, back in the day, which broke up and checkerboarded our land because the government at the time didn't want us to have a big land base in which we could realign ourselves, and stand for our own rights again.
Because I think growing up, you just hear about Indian reservations or, tribal lands, and you think of it as a contiguous entity. You think of it as like a block of land, the same way you think of, the state of Virginia or something. But visiting, I realized that that's not the case at all, that it's this crazy patchwork of private inholdings and federally owned land. It's like basically nobody actually owns their own land there.
When you're living on trust land, the feds own the land primarily. And then we are given a subset of rules in which we occupy the land and have rights to it for a temporary period of time. So if I get a
which
home,
means the individuals can't buy and sell their own homes in the same way, right? And
exactly.
They don't technically own the property.
And finance those homes.
So they can't borrow against it. They can't.
Right. It creates a huge handicap for us just off jump, in the space. And so we've worked a lot of different ways to try and work around it, but it's never as easy, as it is off reservation to leverage that kind of a mechanism.
I mean, talk about that. Like, how do you build community strength when there's so many things stacked against you?
Our culture and our language and our spirituality is what kept us together. When we talk about us, we're roughly 40% poverty rate, 50% unemployment. And all of our youth grow up, get an education, and leave, and we want them to come back home. But at the same time, if they don't come back home because we know that they've found a good life or are living a good life, and when they come back home, we want our youth to help us rebuild. So part of this renewable energy effort is to renew that spirit as well. So people have a way to come back home, have a good job. And our goal at Sage is to create a land company so that all of our employees can get a loan and build their own home on fee land or trust land, so that we can finance that in the same way that they would get a loan from other places. Because there's no turning back. We can't go back to live the life that we used to live How do we do that in a way that we support ourselves flexibly?
So talk about the wind development that Sage is pursuing.
So with the wind development, what we understood back when we did the RFP and we had all those developers come was that our winds are roughly 46 to 50% net capacity factor, which means they're blowing 50% of the day.
So anybody that visits the Dakotas could tell you that it's basically windy all the time.
There's sunburn and then there's windburn. You literally get windburn out there if you stand around too long. And so we fortunately have a KV line, which is a commercial electric line that travels through Standing Rock, and we're able to interconnect our power through there. So we've been going through an interconnection queue study process for the last 4 years, and we're coming to the end of that with the generator interconnection agreement to develop 235 megawatts. The tribe had originally looked at doing that on tribal land and some fee land, and then we've had to shift because we're protecting our sacred sites. And now we're finally in a position where we're using agricultural fields, and we're leasing fee lands already, option leasing fee lands, and moving to get our trust land or the tribal land secure for the project. So roughly 56 turbines interconnecting for commercial power to sell commercially, and that revenue will come back and those profits will come back to the tribe.
And just for context, the 235 megawatts, I mean, that's roughly enough power for a medium-sized town, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's like 100,000 homes, or like, I mean, that's a big project.
It's a big project. Our goal is to have tribes be a part of that transmission corridor so that tribes can get revenue from corridor, owning transmission through their lands, also their renewable energy assets of selling their power commercially, because this model can happen through all of the tribes in the wind corridor space.
You know, and these are the types of projects that we consistently try to support through the Honor Foundation, just because it's so obviously win-win. We're like, oh, that's the way the world should be. And I think most people looking at this from the outside would think like, oh, that's obviously the way the world should be. People making choices for their own community to develop energy the way they think best to help their people. And it all seems like so obviously good. Mm-hmm. Why has it been such a challenge to implement? You know what I mean?
When we take a look at how difficult it is to do things on tribal land, where partners are really needing to be convinced to be involved because they don't have relationships within tribal nations.
Yeah, so I guess then what do you see as the role of Sage as kind of being a first mover in this space to like demonstrate that this is possible, that this works, that other tribes are potentially capable of doing the same thing with their own resources? And
a lot of tribes are really at this, and trying to develop their energy assets. The folks down at Hopi and the Navajo, or the Dene Nation down in the Southwest have solar, and that is abundant, there.
Which we're also supporting several projects through the Honor Foundation.
There it is.
Mid Renewables and several others. Yeah, I mean, it just makes sense that when you're bathed in sunlight all the time.
Yeah, and then where we are, we have this big project, then we're working also on a single turbine project, and that will spin and directly provide credit. Once we sell the power wholesale, that money will come back and provide credit for our elderly, and then build out into the other parts of our community so people can get discounted credit. And when we get the wind farm up, then some revenue can come back to that for our people to also get very heavily discounted energy so that they can use that money to spend on things that we want instead of just what we need, to get by month. Mm-hmm. Provide a little bit of cushion, a little bit more revenue for those folks who are at the very hardest point of their economy, to make our lives a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. I know that's the thing that it's hard to paint the proper picture through a podcast in a way, but I mean, visiting Standing Rock, I was just like, man, this is a tough way to live, harsh climate conditions. And then when you don't own your home, you can't really insulate it. You can't borrow against it. You just can't really improve your way of life that much. And then so much of your income just gets spent just on the survival, I mean, the fact there's no grocery stores, you have to like drive to Bismarck basically, or like there's no, like everything about life is harder than it feels like it needs to be. And so, it's interesting to see renewable energy as a way to potentially help elevate the whole community, just like to put some money back into.
Our next goal is to put electric vehicle charging stations into each of our 8 communities so that we can build a tribal fleet around electric vehicles. And that too will reduce costs. We're just finding ways to socialize renewable energy and electric vehicles, electrification in a way that talks about the relationships, to our folks, and how this could be moved forward, and what it can do for the economy as a community and as individuals.
I feel like one of the takeaways from the work that Sage has been doing and sort of this long, slow transition to renewables is just that a lot of the work is not that sexy. It's basically a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of applying for federal permissions and like interconnection fees and, like connecting to the grid. In a way, this, indigenous sovereignty, this community-led power, I mean, it all sounds amazing. It's definitely the way the world should be. And yet you've dealt with a tremendous amount of red tape and just obstacles, like just grinding literally for years on this project. And so, I think it's important for the average person to sort of realize just how much effort goes into sort of making these changes happen. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I remember when, before I ran for council, my brother was chairman of the tribe, Ron is Horses Thunder, and he had talked about, he said, brother, these guys came to talk about putting turbines up, and I was just, yeah, let's do it. Like it could be just done. Like it could happen in a month or a year.
Yeah.
I didn't understand.
And I think most people think that, they're kind of like, oh, you want to do a thing? Just do the thing.
When we looked at doing Ampetui to start off with, and Ampetui is the name of the wind farm. Ampetu means day, and we is the sun. So Ampetui is the first rays of the morning sun. And that's when we go pray. So we look at this project as a guiding light, not just for our nation, but for others. So when we first took a look at Ampetui with our wind, with the tribal land we had, with the power purchasers that we were talking to, everything was lining up.
Yeah, it's all a no-brainer. You're like, this is easy,
this could
slam
happen
dunk.
in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Here we are 4 and 5 years into it, looking at another 4 or 5 years, as far as permitting goes, environmentals go, the shifts that we needed to make, the funding necessary, raising the capital to do the pre-development work to maintain our ownership, and developing these relationships, because a lot of the things that people don't understand is that it isn't just having the resource, but it's also having the reputational partners that when they say you have this wind, people believe it. It's an industry standard. And in that space was developing a lot of relationships, folks who believe in the work that we're doing and see that this is a model for the future for some people, maybe not all people, and want to support that.
So what do you think the average person should do if they care, they care about the planet, they're trying to do something? I mean, you found a sort of particular way of trying to empower your community. In some ways it's sort of a unique path. But what do you see as the best avenue for the average person who wants to have an impact in the world and do something useful for the planet?
Look at how you're spending your money, where it's coming from, where it's going to, and the durability of what it is, the quality of what it is that you're consuming and utilizing is going to affect, others that you may not see. I guess it's just being a little bit thoughtful and being highly respectful. And I think that respect word isn't used a lot as far as conservation goes, but it really does have a deep meaning, not just in the respect for our relationship, but the respect for how we move together, how we live together, and what we utilize. So if a person just thinks about that, respect of where your parents came from, how they struggled to bring you to where you are today, and what are you going to do, to make a better tomorrow for those that won't even know your name.
Well, Joe, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's always a pleasure to chat.
Yeah,
and thanks for being on Planet Visionaries.
Absolutely.
Joe, thank you so much for speaking with me today. We'll put links to Sage's work in the show notes. Planet Visionaries is a podcast in partnership with the Rolex Perpetual Planet Initiative and a Sony Music Podcast production.